Hey friends, welcome back to another Seed Talk with Layne and Lisa. Hey Layne.
Hello, and you reversed it there. The Layne
I
and
know,
Lisa.
I noticed that. I decided you alphabetically, you do go before me.
True.
Changing things up a little bit, friends. Hey folks. So today we're talking about something that's kind of new for me in the last few years, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you're new here, welcome to Seed Talk. And if you want to learn more about the work that we're doing at thegardenersworkshop.com, where we are flower farmers, gardeners, and flower lovers that love equipping and educating others to be able to grow cut flowers, whether it's in your backyard or to build a business. All right, Layne, what's up today?
So today we're going to be talking about the results of some cool flowers drying experiments. So we're just going to go through a bunch of different cool flowers and describe to you how they dried, so that maybe if you're planning a garden and you're wanting to know what things to include for some dried flowers for next year, this might help you to know which things you want to plant.
That is such a great idea. And I think, Layne, for flower growers, flower farmers, people in business, this is an excellent add-on product. And so you don't have to throw away flowers ever again. We hang and dry everything. And we have learned some of them are incredibly valuable, some aren't. So it was a real learning curve. But we learned this from our good friend Ellen Frost, who's been here on the podcast a couple of times, that she doesn't throw any stems away. She dries everything because her whole month of November is they just make and sell dried wreaths. So this is fun. I'm excited about this.
Yes, this is very fun. And I should also mention that there was nothing fancy about the way any of these flowers were dried. They were all just hung upside down and air dried.
Exactly.
And we do have an episode all about how to dry flowers, the entire process, with Ellen Frost. And that is episode 9, if you'd like to go back and check that out. All right, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with some of the more obvious flowers that I think a lot of people know they dry very well. And so we'll move through those, and then we'll get to some of the more interesting, possibly not as popular ones. So first up, we have Statice. And this is one of those very papery feeling flowers. The actual colorful parts are not actually petals, which is why they actually dry so well. It really holds its color and it holds its shape. What do you have to say about Statice, Lisa?
So Statice, I was really late to grow that on my farm because I never knew it was a cool season hardy annual for probably the first 10 years. I always tried to plant it in the spring. It was always short and not abundant. Then I discovered it. And this is an incredibly useful fresh, but even more useful as a dried. You can never grow enough Statice. And when we're at the end of the crop, and I mean, we'll get 30 to 50 stems off of one plant, no joke, off this stuff. I just go down at ground level and grab all the stems and cut them and rubber band them right out in the field to hang to dry. It works beautifully.
Yeah, they're great as a filler, like you said, and they really do. The color intensity is pretty much the same dried as fresh, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, truly one of the ones that holds its color, no joke.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're moving on to 2 other ones, and I've paired them on the same slide because they are pretty similar. And it's going to be Amobium, which is also known as winged everlasting, and straw flowers. And these, again, they have these very papery feeling bracts, and they truly hold their color and their shape when they're dried.
Yes, so Amobium is really sweet. What I love about it is the bloom is much smaller, but there's multiple. That's like a spray stem.
Yeah.
And so that one, I think, has incredible potential in wreath making and other crafts that people make. Straw flowers, just the color variations, that silvery rose, I totally love, and the orange, which is such a perfect fall, winter kind of color, right? That fall color go right along with pumpkin spice. And so, yeah, I mean, both of these are tremendously useful.
And Amobium is a really crisp, clean white. And like you mentioned, Lisa, the flowers are smaller, almost like the size of a feverfew.
Yes.
And then straw flower has a wide range of colors to choose from, and the flowers are a bit bigger. And I do want to talk about the harvest stage for these 2 flowers, because I think that can be a little confusing to people. And also, it has a really big impact on the final look of the dried flower.
Yes, both of these. I'm glad you put them on the same slide, Layne.
Yeah.
The struggle that people have is when should you harvest both of these flowers? And you can see here, in fact, the amobium, much of that was harvested too late. This was part of my experiment. You can see the center, the yellow, it started out yellow center. It's kind of a golden brown now. And straw flowers. So if you're on YouTube, right above where the word straw flower is written, directly above is an orange. That is the perfect stage to harvest. It's as the row of petals are, the first 2 or 3 rows are unfolding and the center is not really exposed yet. And if you look right below that, there is an old straw flower there. It's a silvery rose one, and Layne is actually circling it with the cursor. And you can see how brown that center is. That is because that flower was cut too late. And when it's cut late, it continues to age, where if you cut them earlier, they kind of stop. So I would say half of those straw flowers are at the correct stage and half are not. So you can really look at that. And I learned the very same lesson with amobium. What my goal is, when I'm looking at it in the garden, the center flower, and then there's probably 10 other flowers on spray stems. When the center flower starts to show yellow is when I cut it. The rest of the blooms are not showing yellow, and the quality of the dried will be so much better, more white. If you want variety, that's not ugly, right, Layne? I mean, that's
no.
It just depends on what you need. So it'd be nice to mix it up.
Yeah. So just know if you pick these blooms a little bit late, they will probably blow open and reveal that center. And like Lisa said, I still think it looks interesting. It just is a different look. So just know what you're going for.
Exactly.
Do you harvest at the same stage for fresh and dried use?
Yes. And that's a great question. You can cut straw flowers more wide open for a shorter vase life, for 7 days. But so many people want to dry them when they come out of the bouquet. We just try to stick with that prime stage so that they could be dried because they're so beautiful either way.
Okay, now we're going to move on to a globe-shaped yellow flower, and this is golden drumstick or craspedia, or you might know it as billy balls. And these are another one. They're so fun, and they look pretty much the exact same when they're dried as when they're fresh.
Yep, it's very much like Gumphrena, that same structure. It just really does a lot to the bouquet. And the petals, the flowers on billy balls is just like one of the perennial yarrow, Coronation Gold, I think it's called. This is a really great one to use for so many crafts and wreaths, and just really useful. And in a vase. That would be really cool in a vase.
They would. They're just these bright yellow balls. And I think they would look so cute in little bud vases in your house. Even if you cut them shorter, just sticking out, they're just really fun.
Yes, they are.
Okay, another interesting one that we've talked about a lot on the podcast before is giant poppy pods. And these, again, they do hold their shape pretty much. They change a little bit in color, though.
Yes, and if it's a wet year, they definitely get a lot more black on them, as these have on it. But if it's a dryish year, the pods will actually be more tan, and their structure is so useful. I mean, in wreaths and arrangements used alone, we love dried poppy pods.
Oh, yes. Okay, another one that looks virtually the same when it's dried as when it's fresh is starflower, which is scabiosa stellata. And remember that this is one, we're not talking about drying the actual flower. It's the seed head that develops after the petals have fallen. And it has a round shape. It almost looks like little honeycombs all around it. And there are these little black stars in the center of each of those, what I'm calling honeycombs. This is just such a beautiful one. They're these papery, geometric, bronzy tan globes, and they're just so interesting and textural and fun.
And ours just germinated today, by the way. And they're so beautiful. I mean, I just love seedlings, y'all. But what I wanted to mention about this one, I mean, anybody that goes out to the home stores like TJ Maxx and Home Goods or whatever you have, there are so many faux versions of this flower because of its great structure and interest. And so I encourage everybody to grow this scabiosis and save it. It dries beautifully and you have it indefinitely.
And I should mention this is also known as ping pong scabiosa.
Yes, yes.
Okay, another one that has beautiful pods is going to be Love in a Mist or Nigella. And there are different looks to the pods depending on which species you're growing. And they also have different colors. Sometimes they're more green, sometimes they have purpley burgundy hues, or sometimes they have a combination of both of those colors. But either way, they're very beautiful. It seems like the green color tends to fade a little bit, but the burgundy red seems to remain pretty intense on those dried pods, or it seems to fade to a really pretty pinkish mauve shade.
Yeah, I think it's just the general interest and shape of those seed pods that make them such a really great addition to wreaths and things. When we were selling to Colonial Williamsburg, I mean, they would have taken a dump truckload of these. They just used them in so many different, I mean, all those dried wreaths that they do. But I don't think dried flowers do not last forever, y'all. I mean, I was just thinking about the ping pong. It's like if I use that ping pong in my home, it gets really dusty. You can't
Yes.
really clean it. So you use it and then you ditch it and you grow it again.
Yeah,
And I think the same thing is true with Nigella pods.
I agree, but I love these. And these are so useful for the fresh flowers as well. So this is just a
Oh,
great
yeah.
plant to include in your garden or on your farm. Okay, now we're moving into two that are somewhat similar, but they have a little bit of a different structure. And these are another one that are grown for the little seed pods that form along the stems. And I'm talking about Atroplex and Persian cress. And the primary structural difference here is the Persian cress has a much more open, airy feel, whereas the Atroplex is a little more clustered together.
Yes, for sure. And they are both really great and interesting filler to have for your bouquets in not late, but late spring by the time, because what I can remember the first time I planted Atroplex, when it bloomed in the spring, I'm like, are y'all kidding me? You actually think we're going to sell this? Well, it's not the little insignificant bloom that comes, it's the seed pod that comes. And they are quite in demand for us. Our floral customers loved both of these with the little seed pods, and they dry beautifully and have that same quality. So we love these guys.
They do. And the structure, when it's dried, looks virtually the same, and the color fades from green to a nice tan color.
Yes.
Okay, another really interesting looking dried flower is dill. And you might know what dill looks like. We've described it many times as looking like fireworks. It has that same sort of structure and effect when it's dried as when it's fresh, although the color fades again to a tan sort of color.
Yep. What you actually will experience, probably like we do, when a flower is really in demand or you use a lot of it or you don't grow enough of it one year, you don't really have a lot of it left to dry. And that's, I think that the dill dried, this one was it looks like it's a little smushed, but it still has great interest with all those seed heads. And we'll have some better examples of that next year because, Layne, those big heads that we have, if
Yeah.
we could really individually drive them, instead of bunching them and smushing them together, think about that in a vase.
Ooh,
I
that would
know,
be
I
pretty.
know. That would be awesome.
That'll be next year's experiment.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, now we're moving on to another very useful filler, and that is bupleurum. And I have an image up. One is showing some that are more bunched together and a little more dried out even. And then on the right, there's some that's a little bit looser, but the leaves do shrivel up a bit, and they do tend to take on either more muted green tones or tannish brown tones. But they're still very useful as a filler if you're doing anything with dried flowers.
Yeah, I remember Ellen telling us that bupleurum was always the first flower to get used up when they're making wreaths, that they loved it so much. So yeah, we totally love bupleurum fresh, and there you go, it's even useful dried.
All right, this is one that was a new surprise this year, and this is just beautiful dried. It's safflower or carthamus. This particular cultivar is called Zanzibar. It has these beautiful little tufts of orange flowers on this greenish gray foliage. This dried really beautifully, Lisa. It's very structural, and that orange color is really just as intense basically as when it was fresh.
I actually love this. I was almost going to say love it more dried than fresh, but then I'm remembering how useful it was as a filler before it even bloomed. Yeah, this was the surprise. Really love this. And we just got ours started. I just moved them outdoors today to start hardening off to go in the garden. We plant this fall and in very early spring. I mean, how useful. We use it before it even blooms as a very interesting filler. Then we use it bloomed, and now we're drying it and using it. So this is just another great use cool flower.
What's interesting too is when it was fresh, I think I might have preferred it before the flower was even showing itself.
Yes.
But dried, I actually think it's more interesting with the flower showing.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, next we're going to move on to Monarda lombata. And this one, it does get a bit more shriveled up, but I still think it's very interesting because lombata has really interesting shaped flowers. And there are still hints of that lavender purple color of the flowers, even when it's dried.
Yeah, I agree, Layne. This was a surpriser. This is one of the ones that I was surprised over and could definitely see that being used, particularly in wreath work, where, you bunch them, you hold the bunches together, and apply it to the wreath form. And yeah, so that's a keeper for sure.
It is. Okay, next we are moving on to calendula or pot marigolds. And these are ones you definitely can tell it's a dried flower. The petals, they don't look exactly the same as when they were fresh, but they still have that really intense orange color in this case. And this particular cultivar was Greenheart Orange.
Yeah, and I'm so surprised over this. That's why we don't have many to show because we just didn't think that they would dry. We just didn't do it. But I can't wait to hang all the colors that these come in because that color is exactly what you're looking for in like wreath work. So
Right.
they were really, I was pleasantly surprised with this one.
Okay, now we're moving on to yarrow, and this is actually the species Achillea or Aelia millefolium. This is not the same species as, like Lisa mentioned before, the coronation gold that holds its color and everything really, really well when it's dried. But I was actually surprised by this one, Lisa. I think this looks beautiful. The structure is still there. The petals are a little bit shriveled, but you almost can't tell. And then the colors are just more muted looking.
Exactly. You know what I instantly think of when I look at this is I think of the Queen Xenia mix. Kind of
Yes.
that muted, it's that same family. So yeah, this is another really pretty one. So I believe that the top half is Colorado Sunset and the bottom half is Summer Berries.
Okay, now we're going to move on to scabiosa. This is not the scabiosa stellata. This is just the regular pincushion flower, scabiosa atropurpurea. And this, it does not look the same as when it's fresh, and the petals are all shriveled, but they're still very interesting looking structure-wise, and the colors are still really intense. You can see the dark color and the blue, and then the buttercream of the Fata Morgana, it still looks kind of buttercreamy, even though it has a little more of a tan tone to it now.
I was really surprised over the blue cockadee, how it kind of held. It's not the same color, but it is a cool color, a color you don't see in dried flowers very often. So yeah, these were all surprising.
Yeah, there really is an intense blue and then the black night with those really dark petals.
Yes.
And I actually like the look of the ones that lost their petals. I think that's a really interesting shape.
Yes, I like that too.
Okay, now we're moving on to another one. And I think this was a surprise to you as well, Lisa. And this is feverfew. And there are a bunch of different varieties that we're showing on the screen right now. But this is such a great filler. The flowers definitely shrink. The white turns into more of a tan, which is just very common when flowers are getting dried. But it's still so interesting and full.
Yes, and this is actually There's 5 different varieties of feverfew in this picture. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised over all of these. They all have a different, when you pull them apart and look at them, as far as wreath work, and you're always looking to have some other varieties of texture, this fills the bill. I was really pleasantly surprised with this one.
Is there a winner in your mind in terms of which variety that you personally like the best dried?
No, because that's why I grow all of the feverfews. They each have their own. I mean, I love the single because it's the most casual look. It's like a little daisy, and that holds true here. And the others just have different forms of buttons. And who doesn't love a button flower?
Yeah, and the center of those Vegmo singles is just a beautiful, slightly muted yellow color now when they're dried, but it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, now we're going to move on to black-eyed Susans or Rudbeckias, and this is specifically Rudbeckia hirta, and these definitely look dried. So if you don't like the look of a really dried flower, you might not like these, but the petals have completely sort of shriveled, but they still have that intense yellow color, or in the case of some of the darker ones, they have almost a blackish look to the petals, but they are very pretty.
And so at first when I looked at these, I thought, oh, look, that one turned black. Well, that's the cherry brandy. It started out that color, right? But when you cluster those blooms together in a little bunch to tuck in on a wreath, it just creates interest. And that's what I had to get over. You're not looking at individual flowers for dried flowers. You're looking at the overall, right, impact. And these are just a great color. So I agree. These are definitely keepers. We'll do more of these this year.
Right. And these were hung upside down to dry. So those petals have kind of collapsed over that center. But these are another one that using just the centers, just those central cones alone without petals, that's a really great dried option.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, next up is going to be Canterbury Bells or Campanula. And this is another one. It's definitely shriveled up. The blooms are kind of shriveled. A lot of the color has faded. It looks like a dried flower, but there are these pretty little hints of the original blue color of the flower.
Yeah, and again, you think about building a wreath, there's a lot of filler behind the color. So you need these added interest components. And so you just have to experiment and see what works for you.
All right, and then our very last one is going to be Honeywort or Cerinthe. The cultivar is Kiwi Blue, and I think this looks just beautiful dried. It has this really intense indigo color where the flowers were. Of course, the leaves have kind of shriveled up and turned a tannish brown, but I just think that indigo color is just beautiful.
I just think that's unachievable in any other flower, that color. We were so taken back because I could have dried a lot more of this and I didn't. You can count on next year. We'll have a nice big bunch. To think about bunching that on wreath work or making little dried arrangements or whatever, tussy-mussies. Really, really love the Cerinthe it's another one, just like the safflower, that I found that I could use it before the buds even opened as a early filler, right through bud, right through blooming. And then what we don't use, you can hang to dry, and it's just beautiful. I love it.
I love it. Okay, well, that was it for this episode of Seed Talk. If you all have any cool flowers that you've experimented with drying and you really like the results, feel free to share that. And also share, what was your favorite looking of these dried flowers? I'm kind of curious to know. And of course, you can leave that information in the comment section over on YouTube, or if you're listening in a podcast app, you can use the form linked in the show notes. So thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And we love when you leave ratings, reviews in a podcast app, and likes and comments over on YouTube.
And Layne, I'd love to hear, what are they doing with their dried flowers? Sometimes I'm so surprised over the things that people are doing. So yeah, friends, remember that it's never too late this time of the year, because if you miss your fall window of opportunity with cool flowers, first off, you can push that limit a little bit. I do it every year, but the next chance will be very early spring for everybody to plant cool flowers. And you can learn more about all of that over at thegardenersworkshop.com. And we'd love to have you drop in for a visit. All right, friends, till we meet again. Bye, Layne.
Bye.